For many, Rashida Tlaib's story of her Palestinian grandmother's humiliation told a familiar tale.
As a young girl visiting Palestine to see my grandparents and extended family, I watched as my mother had to go through dehumanizing checkpoints. I remember shaking with fear when checkpoints appeared in the small village of Bet Or el-Foka, tanks and guns everywhere.
Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, the two U.S. members of Congress, were denied entry into Israel after President Trump urged Israel to ban them. In a tweet, he said it would show great weakness if Israel allowed Representative Omar and Representative Tlaib to visit. They hate Israel and all Jewish people, and there is nothing that can be said or done to change their minds. On Monday, they fired back at the president.
So we are going to hold our head up high, and we are going to fight this administration and the oppressive Netanyahu administration until we take our last breath.
They invited others to share their stories of what they called the human cost of the Israeli occupation. Amber Harris, a Jewish U.S. resident, said Israel sent her home and held her Palestinian husband until he could resolve his own visa problems.
I was held and interrogated for 10 hours by the Shin Bet, the Israeli security agency. My marriage documents were almost thrown away, and I was humiliated.
Israeli-Palestinian issues weren't always so partisan in U.S. political circles, but with the fiery rhetoric coming out of the White House and the makeup of Congress changing, both Republicans and Democrats alike have grown more contentious.
The banning of Rashida Tlaib from going visit her 9-year-old grandma. And she's not the only Palestinian. Millions of Palestinians cannot lost the right of return, and their house has been taken away, their land, even their olive tree has been taken away, changing the demographics, the geographic, and the culture and the political landscape of Palestinian. It's really saddening that really that denial and banning of Representative Tlaib broke this wide open, and now everybody's talking about who is speaking for the Palestinian in this country. The reaction of some of the Palestinian Americans who lives here, and the reaction of what happened in the last few weeks, and the denying and the role that Trump played to force Netanyahu to ban Ms. Tlaib. Dominique Najjar, he is a Palestinian American, lived in this country for a long time, and he's coming. Welcome to Balahdan, Dominique. I mean, this is really, it's not a new story. You live this. You visit Palestine yourself.
Yeah, I visit quite often. I was there a year ago. My last visit was there a year ago.
And they denied Representative Tlaib from visiting occupied Palestine West Bank and visiting her grandma.
Right.
So imagine she went there, and see, what would she tell us about the Palestinian and Palestine that she couldn't do it?
The real story here is that we finally have someone in Congress that is willing to draw the curtain aside and talk about what's truly happening in Palestine. I'll tell you, many, many, many years ago, when I lived in Bloomington, and my congressman was Bill Frenzel, and he was embarking on a visit to Israel. And a small delegation went to meet with him. I was with a small delegation that went to meet with him to talk about his upcoming visit. And I could see his itinerary that did not include any connection to the native Palestinians. So I asked him politely if he had ever been in a refugee camp. He said no. Had he ever been in a Palestinian community?
No, they are not allowed to see any of this.
Well, and he said no, he has not. And I politely asked him again, would you be okay if we arranged it? And he danced around it. He obviously was not interested. So the bottom line is there was never any anyone willing to draw the curtain aside and let people understand and see the true nature of the occupation, of what's happening to the native Palestinians. Now we have Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, who, as duly elected members of Congress, are willing to stand up and have that discussion. And somewhat, there's still an effort to try to put a lid on it. And this banning was part and parcel of this whole effort. That's really what we are witnessing here.
And it's interesting who is putting that lid. Talking about the President of the United States, that he is actually, this is the real collusion, not the Russian crap. This is the real collusion with a foreign country that is getting billions of dollars of aid.
Right.
When you feel this is our president, that he is working on preventing an elected official from doing their job.
Well, we have, over the years, over the decades, have enabled the conditions that exist, the human rights suffering that the Palestinians endure, that the native people endure in that land, at the hands of the Israeli occupation, has been enabled by the United States. So we have had a hand in allowing this to happen. The majority of the U.S. public are not aware. And anytime they become aware of it, they are very empathetic. They understand if they have the chance to learn about it. And here's a chance to learn about it directly from congressional representatives visiting the area. And they're not allowing it. Ostensibly, the Israelis have denied or wanted, their denial came primarily that because Ilhan Omar, particularly, and Rashida Tlaib have spoken in support of the BDS, the Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement.
It's bullshit.
But the BDS, but that's another story in itself.
We boycott people all the time, and people have the right to do it.
Exactly. Boycott is what we do. Now, let me remind you of just something that happened not very long ago, when in Brunei, in Asia, the leader decided that the Sultan decided he wanted to make Sharia law official in Brunei. Well, we were appalled by the fact that he wanted to apply Sharia law, very oppressive conditions for the people. George Clooney embarks on a boycott movement to kill the tourism to Brunei. And let me tell you, there wasn't a soul in this country that was not applauding George Clooney for doing it. That's what we do.
That is baloney, not George Clooney.
And so when people speak about the oppressive conditions in Palestine and they speak in support of a boycott movement against Israel, the first club they're hit with is the club of anti-Semitism, as opposed to bringing up the discussion about the nature of
This is libel, blood products and service coming from a country that exploits millions and thousands of Palestinians, that they work under those horrible conditions and they're underpaid and all of this. So boycotting Israelis' product the same way we boycotted the South Africa and boycotting in Russia and all of those things. But what I'm saying is, that cooperation or that bonding collusion between the Americans, not just Trump or the Republican Party. This is, the Democratic Party is more implicated with this than the Republican Party. They go, more Democrats go there and visit and buy into the narrative of the only democracy in the Middle East crap. And this is an apartheid state. This is the only apartheid state in the Middle East.
The conditions for the natives are precisely, they meet every definition, the classical definition of apartheid. So what we're talking about is a humanitarian tragedy. The discussion now is and should be about human rights. You have a native population. If you look at the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, there is over 4 million native Palestinians, native people who are not Jewish. The question to be asked is, as world citizens, shouldn't they be entitled to the same rights as every other citizen around the world? Why is it that in their case, we allow things to take place, and when the BDS movement, when we try to stifle discussion and we attack the BDS movement in the US, whereas universities and all the institutions in the US are ardent supporters of the First Amendment and the right to boycott.
They have a law against it.
But they now, of course, you hear the phrase the Palestine exception. It's so, yes, we support the First Amendment right to boycott, but when it comes to Palestine, there's an exception. And indeed, there are plenty of laws. As of, I believe there's about 27 states, maybe more by now, that have enacted anti-BDS laws, starting in 2015, but Tennessee was the first state. Minnesota joined that group in May 3rd of 2017. I believe Governor Mark Dayton signed the Minnesota anti-BDS law.
Even the good ones. What's the legal basis for this law?
Well, the laws, for the statute in Minnesota, and I believe most of the other states, it's rather ironic because most of them say that if you support the boycott movement against Israel, then we're going to boycott you. If you're a contractor, service provider to the state, you can no longer.
So you can actually do it.
You can no longer contract with the state of Minnesota. You can no longer do business because you are supporting the boycott, which in a sense is the height of irony. You boycott. We get to boycott you to punish you for practicing in the boycott
like children.
movement.
You boycott, I'll boycott.
But Ahmed, I want to point something last year or a little more than a year ago that an effort was made in Congress to criminalize. Now that's a different story.
Yeah, that's not.
That is, in other words, to try to enact legislation that would make it a felony if you are supportive of the boycott movement. Now, that legislation has been stopped. I hope it will be stopped forever. But that is the most dangerous thing you can imagine, that by practicing your First Amendment right to speak up or to engage in the boycott movement, that you are then charged with a felony.
So banning Muslims here is not a felony? Banning helping or a foreign country or an idiot like Netanyahu to prevent elected American official from entering a country, doing the job enough. I mean, you have that piece, probably you read, I don't know if you read my piece or not,
yes,
but
I have,
Thomas Friedman's the big idea man. He's from here,
yes, I know.
Park. And he was talking that why would Somali asking here why Ilhan Omar interested in the West Bank, west of Jordan,
yes,
and not West Bank here, and not taking care of West Bank here, violence and all of that. And probably he heard this from a cab driver, somebody said it, but because that's his biggest source of information. I wonder what would you do when Uber introduces a driverless car there. I don't know. This guy is gone. But the point is, the assumption is if you are a Somali American, that means you have to go after Somalis. That means if you are a Jewish American, you have to go with Israel. No, she's an American elected official that her job is, and she's elected by more than the Somali Americans.
Absolutely.
A lot of Jewish American also, progressive agenda. And her job is to look into the affair of a foreign country that takes.
Well, she sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Yeah, Foreign Affairs. That's what they do.
So that is part and parcel of her job as a member of that committee. And if they want to learn firsthand about what's happening, the impact and the conduct of U.S. foreign policy, then they have to be able to visit and see for themselves.
And have access to this. But, as a Palestinian American, you lived there for a long time. Do you see any trend changing the tie now?
I've been speaking on this issue pretty much the whole time I've lived in Minnesota, which is now coming up on 45 years
yeah.
or 46 years.
Yeah.
I see the curtain being drawn a bit further wider, and there is a little bit more discussion. The sad reality is things have not gotten better for people on the ground. So, you know, for me, the main objective is to see things create change, real change on the ground over there. So, you know, when Oslo came about in 1993, I personally, as many other Palestinians, were ecstatic, thinking this was going to be the chance to bring the two-state
was
solution.
optimistic.
But let me tell you, last July, which is about 14 months ago, when I was there and driving in the West Bank, you know, the entire spine of the West Bank is gone. It's completely built up with Israeli settlements.
Settlers, yeah.
So
it's illegal.
So they have truly taken the natives and they have put them in a success in large prisons. You know, Gaza looks like a prison with a fence around it, but the Ramallah district is no different. Bethlehem is no different with a wall. You go north to Nablus, Tul Karam. And so there is no hinterland for the native population. They don't have the space to create suburban sprawl. They're just like packed on each other in the most miserable conditions.
Ghettos. You know,
and yet then the settlements are built and the settlers enjoy all the water, 9 times water, the amount of water that's allocated to Palestinians. It's a crime that the people don't even have water to meet their daily needs, their basic daily needs. So that's where that we need to talk about. Why is one person able to have all that water and the other person can only have a small 1/10 of that? Why is one person able to go to a certain court of law if they're aggrieved and the other person does not?
They have different ID, different legal status.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely, different thing. Everything is color coded. Your IDs are color coded. Your license plates are color coded. Everything you see is color coded, and that's what we need to talk about. What are the rights? What should be the rights for the native population? That's really what we need to talk.
You know, you can talk about the Republican Trump and all of that, but I think the Democratic Party and their history is as well.
No, that has been the policy has been the same whether Democrats or Republicans have been in power. You know, the support has been the same. So our criticism of the Israeli lobby is not meant when we are charged with being anti-Semitic. We criticize the evangelical Christian movement for their support. That just as well. Yeah. So this has nothing to do with being anti-Christian or anti-Semitic or any. This is a criticism of policy.
Well, this is not, you know, if you keep God out of the real estate business, this is a white settler nationalist
Correct.
project.
It's a colonial project.
And we've been supporting it all along. And the question is how long this is going to go.
Well, you know, as the world, the U.S. being in the position of power and being the sole really superpower.
But this has changed a little bit.
This is changing a little bit, but being in that position and being the enabler has allowed it to go on. The hope is that there will be enough people of goodwill in this country who, as they learn about this, will encourage their representatives to take a closer look and
this is interesting because things are shifting a little bit and the curtain is cracking a little bit. You can peek to the reality of the Palestinian. What's happening in the Arab world, it's almost the opposite where the Arab Zionist leader now they are now the Israel.
I am not going to appeal to the Arab world for that. But when you look at the southern border of Gaza, Egypt is just as complicit in closing the southern end of that prison. So an alliance, if you will, partly driven by their concern about the rise of Iran and the Sunni Shiite conflict, which is another.
And also the Israeli help them to stay in power.
And they help them stay in power. Yes, everybody's
the
about
people,
maintaining
the people
their
are not
power.
helping the dictator to stay in power. But thank you so much, Dominique Najjar, Palestinian American, lived in this country enough to see the trend and the atrocity committed against the Palestinians and the vulnerable Palestinians. They've been bombed, they've been boycotted, they've been blockade, they've been treated like subhuman in this country, and it's amazing that the story hasn't been told yet. So we wish this is going to change, and what happened with Rashida Tlaib that is opening up the discussion and the debate about the fate and the demise of the Palestinians. I will see you next week. Assalamu alaikum and God bless you all.
It was supposed to be a peaceful day, but as unarmed protesters marched towards the border fence, Israeli soldiers opened fire. Sharpshooters were deployed, but Palestinians, frustrated by the endless siege they live under, but for besieged Palestinians, demonstrating next to the border is about the only visible means available for the world not to forget their plight.
We live under immense pressure. That is why the people explode. The blockade and the siege led to the explosion. We either choose to live properly or to die. We have no space. We have no alternatives but to explode. We have nothing except the oxygen in the air.
Land Day is considered the first Palestinian popular uprising. For the past 42 years, Palestinians have been commemorating this day. But this year, after Trump's declaration over Jerusalem, it has taken greater significance. It all started here in northern Israel, after thousands of hectares of land were confiscated from Palestinians back in 1976. 6 Palestinians were killed then. Yara Mohammed says nothing has changed since. Palestinian land is still being taken away, now more than ever.
We came to commemorate this day because we have to confront the state. It's important to remember our martyrs, and it's important to save our ownership of the land. I personally think we should resist until our last breath. We shouldn't negotiate anymore. We shouldn't give up our rights. We need to find new ways.
Many of the people living in Gaza today are refugees, and their demands